Okay, so, well, I like to use these covers because I think they are cool. They had nothing to do with the talk, so don't worry. There's no cars in this talk, nothing wet. We will be completely fine. You can, um, you can see, though, there's some important information there. That's where you can find the slides. And also my Twitter handler, which you should just go ahead and follow me, because I want to reach 2,000 millions followers, if I can, this weekend, over this weekend. So let's see if that works. That never works anyway. So okay, so I'm a Google developer expert, and it just sounds cool. Um, you can see you can see me giving a talk at some of the conferences I've been this year. I also been a host like Carmen today, and that's lots of fun. You can see this is a DroidCon in London. So I also go to Android conferences. Wow. And it's okay. Nothing happened to me. So I'm still alive. Don't talk about web and progressive web apps. They don't like it. So I'm also an international speaker, and you can see me giving directions to some people at the conference to find Buckingham Palace. This is it happens sometimes. People get lost. Okay, so I've done few talks. These are, if you recognize some of these logos, I've been doing talks there. Probably you will find a video or some slides online. So that's interesting. That's also to show like I'm doing a lot of talks, if you didn't know about it. Really quick show up, bragging. There's also this thing that I do. I do these trainings, and maybe you recognize someone from the students. And this is, just to make it easier for you, this is Todd Moto. And I asked him to help me out, and he was helping me out being on Twitter all day. That was very helpful. But he's really nice guy. This was at QCon London this year. I'm also a community leader, like some of you, and I'm really happy to see a really healthy community here in Belgium. It's not easy to organize an event like this one, and you have gone very far. So congratulations. This is one of the communities I run, Angular Zone, and we have around 800 members already. And you can find some of the content that we produce in YouTube and also videos from the meetups. So I would recommend you to follow it. I just recently, it's not by chance that I also created this new other community, which is GraphQL London. And it's already kicking out. So we have already half 1,000 members, which is really cool. So you can see the things that I like. And finally, this is a long intro of myself, I know, sorry. We are going to get into the topic soon. This is a project of mine. This is the first Angular conference happening in a cruise. And there will be a lot of Angular content. We have nice speakers, and there will be other activities as well. If you have any questions, you can come to me later. But think that it's going to be like very expensive. So it's not, if you don't have a big pocket, just don't think about it. It's departing from Miami and then going around the Bahamas. Um, we need some, how to sell this to your boss. I know. We need to add this to the web page. But okay, so this is the intro. This is the intro. Now you know me a little bit more. Also, after the talk about the banana outfit, I think you got the full picture. But today I'm going to talk about GraphQL. And probably most of you are thinking, oh, so this is the next version after D3. Or yeah, you think about some graphic library or something like that. So the first thing is meeting the logo. And you can see this is a pink logo. with some, there are some nodes, some connections, and this is what is GraphQL about. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But if you feel a little bit stressed, and I know that we have the JavaScript fatigue, and I'm going to ask you, how many of you are in that space? You are tired of learning new things. Okay, you all want to learn. That's cool. So I'm going to try to get you to learn a new technology like is GraphQL. So let's see a little bit of background. This is the co-authors for the GraphQL library, and we can see some of them. So if you are interested to follow up, these are the best persons to follow. And I'm not going to pronounce the names because they are a little bit difficult for me. So GraphQL timeline. I would like to put GraphQL in context, and I think the timeline is also a good tool to do that. So we need to go back into 2012, and Facebook is facing some challenges. They are moving from HTML5 to native apps, and I just thought that was a good idea to show how it looked at the time. So this is how the install Facebook app looked at the time. So this is 2012, and since then Facebook has been using GraphQL. So if you're using any of the clients of Facebook, you are already using this technology. So I think that's some interesting fact there. So it's really successful. It's proven really successful for Facebook. And after some years, Facebook decided that this technology could be also interesting for the community. So they open sourced it and created the first specification. This is GraphQL implementation in JavaScript. It's using Express, written in using Node. And then from there, other members of the community decided to implement this specification in different languages and flavors. So it's been quite interesting following this growth on the community. And just recently, to tell few like highlights from this year, there was the announcement from GitHub that they just migrated all the REST APIs to GraphQL. So that's a really important moment this year. And then the second moment that I want to highlight is when I created the GraphQL London meetup, also very important. So we can see the website. This is the website. So if you want to learn about GraphQL, you can go there. You can use the tools. All the small windows with showing GraphQL code, you can go there, change it, and see the results. It's really really easy to follow. So that will be the first resource I want to recommend you. Then there's also the first big conference. That was a GraphQL Summit in San Francisco. And there are a lot of videos and resources around it. Like, for example, like today in NGV, there will be a lot of good content. And obviously, you don't have to be there, but you can also follow and watch the videos and so on and so forth. So that's something that happened recently in October. Then just a few weeks ago, Apollo announced this product. This is to give some more tooling into the backend. So what you can achieve is some nice caching strategies. You can also see how is the query load, how is the bandwidth that is being used. So these are all interesting tools that I think it's good that you know. One way of learning about GraphQL is showing against REST API. REST API. So I'm going to show you in this diagram. We have the REST API on the left side, and then we have GraphQL, how it will look, the setup for a GraphQL layer. So we have a client, and we can see that this client is using separate data sources, so we can see SQL, MongoDB, S3. This is maybe not the regular case scenario, but it's just to show how it's being used. And you can also see that there are some cross borders. So from one of these intermediate layers, you can also access some other data sources. In GraphQL is a different story. We only have one endpoint, and everything is going through that endpoint. And then there's some clever separation, so we can have the different data sources work in a streamline. So that's also not helping on the client side, but also on the back end, which is really good news. There are some implementations that I want to bring in this talk. And there's not only the JavaScript implementation. You can see there are all the common suspects, and also the new languages are also there. Like probably Elixir and Scala are the most interesting. But then you also have PHP, you have all the legacy options there, .NET, Java. You know, you have everything. I don't know. I put the Go language because it's fun, but it's there. There's also an implementation, and there's also an implementation for TypeScript. So if you like TypeScript, that's yours to use. I'll show you how the GraphQL server looks like, but there's also the query language, and I'm going to show you a simple example. So we have a simple request. As you can see, there's only one endpoint, and the default is GraphQL. And then right after this endpoint, we have the query. And the query will look very much like a JSON object with some differences. So we can see this is a user, what it's called a type. And then we are passing some arguments, some parameters. So this is going to filter and just take this user. And then after that, I'm giving the context, the requirements for this query. And I'm just asking for the Twitter field. And just if you don't know, my Twitter handler is Gerard Sans. So if you see how the query and the result compares, this is a one-to-one relation. So when you are building GraphQL clients, it's really easy to predict what will be the result. So that's exactly coming using the same identifiers. So who is using it? Obviously, Facebook is using it since 2012. Then we have a big player like GitHub. That means that it's reliable and it's performant. Then we have also other providers like Pinterest, Shopify, and Coursera. So it's becoming slowly more and more adopted. And you can imagine if it works in Facebook, obviously we are not all working for companies like Facebook, but that means that it's handling it pretty well. So that will be the end of the introduction. The next topic I want to talk about is the GraphQL schema. And the GraphQL schema is what sits behind all this new technology. And it's kind of the way that you define how your data is related and what fields are composing this, what we presented before, the types. And it's really simple. So I'm going to try to give you a first intro. The type system will be using some basic types, and we can find the regular types that you would expect, like we have integer, float, string, boolean, and then we have this specific ID that it can change from implementations, but this will give us a specific identifier for the different instances. Then we have some particular object types that this will be part of our model. In this talk, I'm going to present an example using a fantastic to-do list that you will be very familiar with, and I hope you enjoyed. So, and then we have the entry point. So we have one endpoint that is sitting on the GraphQL server, but then we have 3 different APIs. So these APIs are the query APIs, that this is to fetch data. Then we have the mutation, that is to modify our model. And then now we have also another option that it's for real time, which is subscription. And we can use any of these different APIs to do the different features that we require for our clients. We will see some more examples and also the architecture. For the schema syntax, when we define our GraphQL schema, we have some specific way and syntax to do that. And it's not difficult. So we can define some of these types which can be nullable, so they can be empty. And we will just do it with using the type. So in this case, if I just use a string, it means that this can be also null. And we can use also that for the object types that we define. If it's not nullable, I will just use the exclamation mark, and that will mainly mean that it's mandatory. Then we also have some specific lists, like arrays, and we can use the common square brackets, and that works for any of the types, even system or user-defined. So that's not too much. The overall architecture will be available for different front-end frameworks. I'm showing React and Angular. I will remove the two as we learn in the keynote. So we have other options. So we can also use vanilla JavaScript. We can also use other smaller clients. In this case, I'm going to show you some code using Apollo client, but this is not the only option. We also have Relay. That's the kind of the Facebook version of the client. Then we also have another client that is called Loca. And then we can also use like plain JavaScript. For my example, I'm going to use GraphQL as a service, so I don't have to go and create all the GraphQL server on my own, which is a little bit more work. So how it looks. So if we go to GraphQL, it will give us a dashboard, and we can just specify, using the syntax that I just showed you, we can create the different fields using the different types, and it's quite easy. Obviously, we can go ahead and use Express. There are some projects that we can use and create the same schema, but on our own. For the to-do schema that we are going to use, I'm going to go through the different bits so you can see how it would look. And the first on the root, we have the schema, and we have these two APIs. So we have the query, just to fetch data, and then we have the mutation. And then these specific tags, we can further define what will be available for our clients. In this case, we only have this fetching API that will retrieve all the to-dos that we have created. And then GraphQL will create some arguments that will help us to filter and maybe take, implement pagination. And these are like some helper features that we can just use right away. Then we can also see that with the colon, we are also specifying the returning type. So in this case, we are saying that we are using an array, that it will be mandatory, and the content for each of these items will be a to-do type that will also be mandatory. So it will always return an array, even if it's empty. And then we have the type, the object type, that it will be the center, in the center of our application, which is a to-do item. And then we can see the common fields. So we have the ID, using this ID type, that can be implemented in the way that the server has been set up. But this can be different from different GraphQL servers. And then we have the other fields. So for the text of the to-do, this is a string that will be mandatory. And then we set the state of the task that will be complete, and we will use a Boolean. So I think it's pretty easy. If we continue, we have covered the fetch APIs. We also have the mutations, so we can add new to-dos and also toggle them as finish or complete. And this will look exactly like this. I just copied the schema just for easy reference. And then for mutations, we can use the same syntax, and in this case, the result will be a new to-do, or the same to-do, but with this flag change. So this is baby steps. I think it wasn't that difficult. I think I haven't lost anyone. If you haven't followed, maybe you should change careers. I think. Was really easy, like basic types, exclamation point, lists, arrays. It's really easy. Sorry if I offended anyone. It wasn't my intention. I was thinking that it's easy. So on the tooling, we have graphical, and this is when we use the toolkit from the reference implementation. It comes with this tool. And this is a really nice tool if we compare it to what we have to use with REST APIs. So let's start with a little demo. And I'm going to test, I'm going to show some of these queries and mutations using this API. So that's what you get when you install and run the GraphQL server. And this is the tool. So this is coming without any work on our side. So I'm going to go through these different exercises. And the first one, I'm going to remove this. Sure. Sorry. Maybe. Is that enough, or what do you think? One more. Okay. So I'll start using a simple query. So as we saw before, it uses this kind of JSON-like notation, and I'm going to just show the options, so we get some nice preview of the options because we are using the schema definition. The tool is able to go through the different options, and there are some other options that I haven't shown, but these are implemented by GraphQL, the tool that I'm using. So I'm going to use these alt to-dos, and I'm going to just fill in some data. In our case, we have use this, and you can see the autocomplete is quite nice. I can execute it and get the results. And as we saw, it's coming using exactly the keywords that we have used. So in this level, we get an array of to-dos, and then we get the details. So it's really easy to follow. So I'm going to just write this down. Then I'm going to use one idea that GraphQL introduces, which is to refactor. This is called a fragment. And I'm going to use info. And I can use this syntax to just get some fields. And when you are thinking of a large surface, a large REST API surface, it's quite interesting. So just by using this, I just refactor this code, and it's still working as expected. I can also go ahead and create another fragment. And I'm going to use state. And you can imagine sometimes we want to, from our clients, we want to get some different information and use this in different places. So this is also a nice way to do it. And I'm using kind of a similar spread operator that is available in ECMAScript 6. So that should be familiar enough. So we are still getting the same results. The next thing that I want to show you, I'm going to go through some, helper methods. So you can also use the alias. So you can change these properties. Maybe I don't want to use an ID. I want to use a git. and then I want to use a title. And this is how development looks in GraphQL. So I don't need to contact the backend guys and ask them to create a new endpoint, or I don't need to create the features to give me the ability to change this. It's just dynamically creating those. And for the complete, I'm going to use done, because I prefer done. And I'm going to run it, and you will see I just change the layout of the response without any contact with them, with the backend guys, because we just don't want to contact them. It's perfect. Very efficient. So, sorry, maybe some of the jokes are not translating well in Belgium. Carmen, you can help me there. Yes. So you can do all this, and it's covered by the query language. There's also another nice feature. So I'm going to just create multiple query using the same like the same request, and I'm going to call it active to dos. And for this one, active to dos, and then no, I'm missing the type. Okay, so I want to now apply a filter, and there is this feature that comes from the tool that I'm using, and I can just use some arguments. So I'm going to set this to false. So I'm just doing two queries. It's just an example. Maybe it doesn't make sense. So it will just return all the to-dos, but then it will filter the ones that are incomplete. In this case, they are all set to false. What I'm going to do is quickly go to the API, and I will just refresh it. I'm going to add some visit again just to show that it's working. And then I'm going to just set one, toggle one, so it's now complete. And I'll go back to this environment, and now I'll get all to-dos. That's the full list, but the active to-dos are just the two that I haven't checked. So that's all working. And now I have shown an example of two different queries executed in just one request, which is very cool. And I can extend this all the levels I want using my schema. And then finally, I want to show, let's see if I have time. I want to show how can I do a mutation. So I'm going to add to do. And then for add to do, I'm going to use create to do, and I need to pass some data. Then I'm going to use for the complete, because I'm creating a new to do. I'm going to set it to false, so it's not complete. And in GraphQL, when we use mutations, we can also ask for some results back. So I'm going to ask for the ID, and this is what I'm going to use after calling the mutation. So this will be similar to a post, but I can also get a fetch in the same go. There's something missing, which is the parameter. And the way we pass parameters is by using this $. So I just need to specify what's the API. So it's taking one string. And then I just, okay, what's the other Antwerp thing? I don't know. Don't do it. Okay, so that's, I don't know what's going on. It's just not working sometimes, the formatting. But you can see the ID that it's coming back. If I execute it again, it will create another one, so I don't want to do that. I'll just show it that it worked. Okay, very good. So that's what I wanted to do. I hope it was easy to follow. There's also this website which is offering all these GraphQL APIs from public services, and this is using GitHub, but there are some other using Twitter and all the common public APIs that has been translated to GraphQL, and you can go ahead and play with different examples. So in this case, I'm doing this query using ngCruise, and I can just use the Twitter profile. I can use the Twitter ID, and I will get all the details from Twitter. And that's the real API. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the intro to the graphical. Let's go to the client. So we have seen how we define the schema. We have used the tool that when we build the Express node server, it's created for us. We can see the auto completion, some good stuff going on. But then we need to still to see how it's being used in the client. So I'm going to show that. And to give an overview, this is how it will look. So we have our query API, and that will fetch the data to our client. And then if we want to change the data, we can use the mutation API. So that wraps up what we have seen so far. What are the dependencies? So if you want to go ahead and implement a client, you will need to add all these dependencies. So we have the Apollo client, and that will be the client for GraphQL in JavaScript. Then if we want to integrate it with Angular 2, we have another small library that we can use. And we can use that library to run the queries and get the results back. This library is using Redux internally. And we will see some examples of how we can add our own reducers and get the state of our client sync really nicely. And then maybe this is something that we can see in Angular 2 being used on templates, which is we have this template literal, which is using this string template syntax, like the backticks, and then it will create the query that we would have to create manually if we didn't use a parser. But this is analyzing the query and creating the implementation for us. So it's a nice addition. And then if we have some support from our tooling, like Visual Code or maybe WebStorm, then we can get these nice features like we have in TypeScript and Angular 2. Also to build our clients, which is a really nice and modern way of implementing APIs. So let's see some code. I'm going to show, maybe this is not the most fun part, but you will see that it's not really difficult. So we have some dependencies that we import, some classes. We are setting the interfaces for the transport. In this case, we just need this endpoint that will be pointing to the GraphQL server. Because I'm using this GraphQL server as a service, it's dependent on their service. But if we use it own develop, it could point to some local server using Express. So that will go there. And then on the Bootstrap, we have an Apollo module that we use similarly as we use with the router. And we have the regular Bootstrap. We just pass an import that will go with this Apollo module using the client that we specified. That's basically the endpoint. And then we just bootstrap the application. So there's not much in there. Let's review the main API. So we have the query API, that's to fetch the data. We have also some nice kind of real-time query. So when there is a change, we will receive the change using this API, using watch query. Then for mutations, we have mutate. And there's also the integration with the Redux instance that will be through these update queries. So what will happen is when we do the mutate, we can implement the update queries, and we can just pass the new data to the Redux state management. So let's see some of this code. This is using the same queries that I used when I was demoing GraphQL. And we just use dependency injection to get our Apollo client. And then we use the query API, which is exactly the same, using the same name as we saw on the GraphQL server. I'm using a name query. So the to-dos is just differentiating this query from others that the application may be using. If I remove that, it will be an anonymous query, but then it won't be easy to differentiate. And that's going also to the tool. So if I'm using Apollo Optics, that will go into the different panels, showing me the performance, what's the bandwidth, and other options. This setting, force fetch, we need to add it because otherwise it will use the Redux local state. So that's also interesting. If we have the data, we can also tell the Apollo client to just use the local data and not always try to fetch from the backend, which could be much expensive. Then we use, as we saw, we have an observable coming from that call, returning from that call, so we need to use subscribe, and the common APIs from observables. So for mutations, mutations will look very similar. We have the mutate instead of the query, and then we have the same exact mutation that I used before to create the to-do. In this case, is the toggle, so it's slightly different. Then we can also see an example of how we can pass the variables from an Angular 2 component. So we use these variables in the config object. And then we can just get the result. When we get the result from this mutation, that in this case it will be the ID and the complete of the toggle to do. Then we can use it and pass it within the subscribe. And then it will use, if you see how it's a structure, it will get into the data argument, but then it will use the update to do, which is the name of the mutation that we have used. And then we can access the ID, text, or complete from there. This is the observable version, like the watch query. So we do the query, but we keep it open. So if there are changes, we can update them. And we are using the sync pipe to do that. The Apollo client is using an observable defined within the library. And that's how it will look. Very similar to the other examples that we have shown. And then we are just using the sync pipe to do the subscription and unsubscription automatically. Okay, for the demo, I think I will skip this demo and just jump into subscriptions. So that demo is exactly the to-do list that I shown before. So let's look into the subscription feature. This feature is using a publish subscribe infrastructure on the server, and it will look more or less like this. So when we execute a mutation, if we have subscriptions implemented on the server, which maybe I didn't mention, I didn't stress, it's experimental yet. There are some implementations, but they are not, probably we would use beta in the Angular environment. So we can use it in this way. So this will create an event that it will be stored on the server. So it doesn't need to be, the clients doesn't need to be connected. So if they connect later, they will still receive the changes, which is a nice feature. Then these events will be sent through to the different clients, and we will get them on this API that I shown using observables, which is a nice fit. So let's see the dependencies. This setup is still a little bit unclear if it will be the final implementation, but it's hot at this time. So if you implemented the server, you will use these GraphQL subscriptions. And then on the client, you will use a WebSocket transport just to get these live events. And the setup will be really similar to what we have seen in the basic setup. So we have this client that we pass another endpoint. In this case, it has this subscription on the server. We have some timeout, so we can deal with that on the clients. The way it will look on the schema is we will be another entry on the root that will be called subscription. And that will allow us to create this subscription depending on the different mutations. I decided to use the same name as the mutation, but you can use any other names. And on the client, it will look like this. We will subscribe to it, add the query, that will just link this mutation with the updates of the different events. And what we specify in here is when we add the mutation, we want to get these fields. So the different clients will get the whole to-do list that was created. Well, in this example is a post, so it's slightly different. And that's the layout of the data. And I'm going to show a demo. I'm a little bit over time. This setup is a little bit more complex, so I've opened 2 different browsers. And I want to do some, it's not. So I want to buy some new jumper. And I'm thinking, okay, let's look for cat, bacon, unicorn. Oh. Images, please. So I want to buy a new jumper, and I thought, oh, this looks good. This looks good. So I'm going to use that. And this is like, what? Exactly. So I'm going to add this new picture on the Firefox version. And I'm expecting to get this, okay, didn't work. Let me refresh. Okay, I got the new entry on the Firefox. Now I should look into the. Okay, doesn't matter. It's dead. So let me. It gets disconnected, so it has lost the WebSocket. This is just a prototype. So I'll just repeat it now that I've refreshed with another amazing shape. So I'm going to use a different one, and I like this one. Okay, so I'm going to add like, this is for Carmen. I need to remember. Okay, now it worked, and if the subscription work, the Chrome client should be updated. Yay! So it's working. So that's the end. I just want to wrap up. So why you would use GraphQL? So I choose this image because you need to choose the right tool for the job. It doesn't need to look good. It also needs to be efficient. So let's see when you should use GraphQL. So some reasons. It's using a declarative language. So we just from the clients, we specify our requirements of the data that we need, and the server will fulfill those requirements. It's completely decoupled from the storage, so we can implement any data sources. It can also be in memory, it can also be in a file, it doesn't matter. That's really powerful. It's also validated and structured, so because we are using the schema, and we have all these nice features that all comes from the schema. We can also add documentation. It's really powerful. And it's basically using all these nice ideas that we use in TypeScript. So the tooling is really, really good. It's also facilitating collaboration. So Facebook is using it because they can share one schema and all the teams are in sync. They don't have to communicate like ask for requirements when they build a new client. It's just on the schema. If they need to do some requests, they can ask to change the schema, but it's all controlled. And then it's also super fast. This was implemented, if you remember, for the native mobile apps. So it's specifically targeting mobile communications. And that's why we get all the data in one request. So it's really performant. There's one post that I explain all of this that I covered today, not subscriptions, but you can see examples in React and also in Angular too. So you can check that. And I hope you enjoyed. You learned GraphQL today. And that's all I got. So I hope you enjoyed.